You might say these films are by Studio Ghibli. You wouldn't be completely wrong, but who exactly is Studio Ghibli? All of these films were written and directed by the legendary Hayao Miyazaki, best known for family films such as My Neighbor Totoro, Howl's Moving Castle, Kiki's Delivery Service, and Spirited Away. Miyazaki's work stretched far beyond these classic Ghibli films though. Not only did Miyazaki work in the animation industry, but also in the manga industry. His works in manga span from 1969 to up to 2015, while his works in animation span a similar time from 1963 to 2018, the last of which being a short film named Boro the Caterpillar. His first time directing a feature film was on The Castle of Cagliostro in 1979, 6 years before he would co-found the famous film studio that would produce the likes of Spirited Away. The Castle of Cagliostro revolves around Lupin III, star of the manga and TV series of the same name, the latter of which Miyazaki worked on as well. The film more or less funked at the box office, but has received high praise from critics and historians, potentially only because of its influence on Miyazaki's career. It is also cited as possible influence on Spielberg's Indiana Jones film. His next feature film, Nausicaa and the Valley of the Wind, has an interesting and perhaps slightly confusing story behind its making. Miyazaki had worked on other mangas prior to Nausicaa, such as Sabaku no Tami, or People of the Desert, and Dubutsu Takarajima, Animal Treasure Island. He was approached by editorial staff from Animage, an anime magazine, and asked for a series of magazine articles. Subsequently, he showed his sketchbooks and discussed his ideas for potential animation projects with Toshio Suzuki, who was at the time an editor for Animage. Suzuki saw their potential, and 2 projects were proposed to the owner of Animage, Tokuma Shoten. Both were rejected because Shoten was unwilling to fund anime projects not based on existing manga. Which leads into Nausicaa's creation. An agreement was made that Miyazaki could start developing a manga for Animage on the condition that it would be never made into animation. In 1982, the first chapter of Miyazaki's manga Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind was published in Animage. Miyazaki would continue working on this project for the next 12 years. It experienced frequent interruptions, and in 1983, Miyazaki started work on the film adaptation. The film was released in 1984 and featured a film score by Joe Hisaishi, the first of many collaborations between him and Miyazaki. You know his music from Totoro, Mononoke, Kiki, Spirited Away, Howl's Moving Castle, and every other Miyazaki-directed Ghibli film. You're listening to it right now. Nausicaa was influenced heavily by The Odyssey, The Journey of Shuna, Future Boy Conan, Lord of the Rings, and a Japanese folktale named The Princess Who Loved Insects. The film focuses on themes of environmentalism and pacifism, embodying Miyazaki's own views. The setting of the film has been described as either a dieselpunk or steampunk post-apocalyptic world plagued by enormous mutant insects. It received critical acclaim for its animation, themes, story, and characters, and frequently ranks highly on lists of greatest animated films ever made. Miyazaki's animation style is very recognizable even from a film as early as this. Painted backdrops with only a few moving parts, musical motifs and sound effects associated with particular ideas or characters. There is a particularly noticeable sound effect that accompanies the unexpected appearance of mutant insects. Looped animation and hair ruffling in the wind. He often uses a panning camera, sometimes followed by a zoom, and also often has periods of silence present throughout the movie, usually to emphasize feelings of peace associated with his themes of environmentalism. You may also note that he also uses a shaky camera technique and sometimes, even though there isn't any camera to shake. Nausicaa's genre is described as animation, science fantasy, adventure, and while it certainly fits in those categories, it puts new spins on each of these ideas. Miyazaki's animation style is unique and more artistic than many of his precursors and descendants. Unlike typical action and adventure films, Nausicaa focuses less on actual fighting and more on the causes and effect of war. Unlike other fantasy works like Star Wars, it is set on our Earth over 1,000 years from now and criticizes humanity's destructive nature. And unlike most science fiction, its concepts are less of a what if and more of a when. The movie version of Nausicaa is quite different from the manga in several ways. For one, the storyline is extended a lot in the manga, as is sometimes the case with anime-manga relationships, and some extra subplots exist such as Nausicaa's ability to hear Omu's voices in her head. The manga is also in black and white, which is a stark contrast from the beautifully coloured film. The manga is still very beautiful, but suffers in that it has less clarity of image, no soundtrack or voice actors, sound effects, less emotional impact, and less impactful action scenes. The anime also has some drawbacks, as the storyline has some plot missing, and the cinematic style can take away from the imagination of the viewer. There is something special about being able to interpret a manga in more ways than one in terms of colour, voice, and aesthetic. Despite their differences, a lot of similarities between the two versions exist, such as the large amount of establishing shots and panels, the reliance on visuals to do more storytelling than the words, detailed landscapes, and use of exposition through the main character. Fun story! Manson International and Showman produced a much shorter English-dubbed adaptation of the film titled Warriors of the Wind. Not only was the story heavily edited, but the environmental, pacifist, and feminist themes were all but erased. Unsurprisingly, Miyazaki was unhappy with this adaptation and adopted a strict no edits clause for future releases of the company's films. Much later, upon hearing that Harvey Weinstein was going to attempt to edit Miyazaki's later film Princess Mononoke to make it more marketable, Toshio Suzuki sent an actual katana with the message, "No cuts." Nausicaa was produced by Isao Takahata, who you may recall is another co-founder of Studio Ghibli, and while the film was created before the founding of Ghibli, it is for the most part considered a Ghibli work, and is often branded with Ghibli's logo, and was released as part of the Studio Ghibli collection. This was the last non-Ghibli film Miyazaki directed. After Nausicaa, Miyazaki founded Ghibli with Takahata and Suzuki, and went on to direct Laputa, Castle in the Sky, under that company. He directed 8 more Ghibli films after Laputa, and collaborated under different roles on several more. Miyazaki displays an open distaste for the current state of the anime industry, despite having such a large influence on it, believing that depictions of people are unrealistic. He has stated that anime is produced by humans who can't stand looking at other humans. In addition to his criticisms of anime culture, Miyazaki has also got issues with world politics and has described Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's policies as despicable, and disagrees with many things the Japanese government has done in regards to military aggression. He has been labelled online by critics as a traitor and anti-Japanese. These anti-war views play strongly into many of his films, including Nausicaa, which may have been partly inspired by Japan's relations with the US Army after World War II, as the US Army stayed in Japan as a military presence, reflected by the Tormekian army in the film. Anti-war themes are also seen in Laputa, Porco Rosso, Princess Mononoke, Howl's Moving Castle, and The Wind Rises. Other central themes visible in his collective works include love, family, and feminism. 5 of his 10 most popular films star a female protagonist, 4 include both male and female protagonists, and only 1, Porco Rosso, stars a male hero, and even that one has major themes of feminism, and establishes the titular character as somewhat misogynistic. He is depicted as a literal pigman, and his growth in becoming less so is one of the main themes. The other major theme central in his works is environmentalism, which is particularly evident in Nausicaa, Laputa, Ponyo, and Princess Mononoke. Several Japanese artists have been cited by Miyazaki as some of his main artistic influences: Sanpei Shirato, Osamu Tezuka, Soji Yamakawa, and of course Isao Takahata, to name a few. Several Western authors have also influenced his works, including Lewis Carroll, Roald Dahl, and Ursula K. Le Guin, the author of Earthsea, which was actually adapted into film by Miyazaki's son Goro. Other works that have influenced him include Animal Farm and The King and the Mockingbird. Miyazaki has been cited as an inspiration to many animators, directors, and writers all over the world, even stretching to Steven Spielberg and Glenn Keane of Disney fame. Aardman Studios and Pixar signed a tribute stating, "You're our inspiration, Miyazaki-san." His influence has even reached to video games such as Ori and the Blind Forest and Ni no Kuni, although the latter was admittedly partly the work of Ghibli. Miyazaki has permanently changed the course of animation history, and his legacy will be remembered for as long as film exists on Earth.